What was the last dream you had? I'm not talking about your random subconscious middle of the night weird stuff dream. I'm talking about the kind of dream, the thing that you want so badly. That kind of dream. Uh, the thing you dream about that gives you a better future. That picture of tomorrow that you long for more than anything else. That kind of dream. The stuff in your heart that makes you get out of bed each morning and drives you and compels you and motivates you. What is that dream for you? What's that empty space in your chest that growls like a hungry stomach? I need that. I need to go after that. That kind of dream. What's your dream? It's that place that you can't wait to get back to. That salary, paycheck, that home that just constantly seems just out of reach. Better, happier, healthier version of yourself. Are those your dreams? What's your dream? You dream for somebody to love you? You dream for children? There were two women in Genesis 30 that was just read for us. You saw that they had dreams too. Really deep, strong, compelling dreams. And they went all out to see those dreams come true, didn't they? They competed, they cheated, they cut deals to get at what was important to them. And that's the story of how Jacob's family came to be. That's a really important story because it's pivotal in the ancestry of Israel, of God's people. It's foundational to the identity of that nation that came from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who would later become the original readers of this passage 3,500 years ago from today. It's really important for that reason. It's also important if you want to get to know and understand that last son mentioned in the text that was read for us today, Joseph, one of the more well-known dreamers of the Bible, whose story we're going to follow over the next few months. And before we get into Joseph's story in the next few weeks, we need to take a look at the situation that he's born into. I think it's really important and foundational. We should see the dreams, I'm using that term loosely today, we should see the dreams that his parents had before he arrived, that might have shaped his life years later as he grew up, and explained a lot of the dynamics in his story. I think we'll pick that up today as we look at the situation he was born into. It's a really important story for that reason. This story is really important for you personally, too. If you've ever been hurt by your family, if you've ever been blamed for something that you didn't do, if you're embarrassed about your past, if that sounds like something that you've bumped into in life, then the story of Joseph for the next few months is really going to connect with your heart, I think. Might as well. This dreamer character, Joseph, is going to go through all of that between Genesis 30 and 50. We'll see that. And it's going to show us how to deal with those messy situations on one level, but it's also going to point us forward to another character in Jesus who would deal with all of that mess on a totally different level. Joseph is really cool for that reason. I love that. And I think that's not just a cool thing to look at. I think it's going to be really deeply encouraging and enriching and comforting to each of our stories because we all know that we have had similar experiences. Being hurt by a family, blamed for stuff we didn't do, embarrassed about your past. This is going to resonate with us and teach us how to deal with it. In addition to connecting with your own personal stories, studying Joseph meets a need for our whole congregation. I'm answering the question, why do we need to study Joseph right now? Why we're getting into this particular preaching series? This meets a need for our whole church. The elders and I see a real need for us to spend some time in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. We need to spend some time there. When we considered the opportunity of preaching through Joseph, I wish you could have seen into the room in that elders meeting. The room lit up. We talked about a few different preaching plans for this part of the year, and there really was a strong spiritual sense, I don't say this lightly, that this is what we need to be focusing on as a church right now. That's a beautiful moment and a beautiful thing, so I hope that's encouraging and empowering to you. I feel like the Lord is leading us in this direction. So partly for those reasons I just mentioned, the story of Joseph is really important. But even more, the story of Joseph is going to help us over the next few months develop our Christology, our understanding of Jesus, a theology of Christ. Because Joseph is this amazing Old Testament type. which is like a foreshadowy, forward pointer character that guides us to Jesus and reveals things about who Jesus would come to be and the things that he would come to do. That's what a type is. That's going to enrich and deepen our understanding of the gospel. Another reason we need to spend time in the Old Testament, and Joseph in particular, is that there's this, you may have heard this if you're on Twitter or any kind of social media, or you track with certain preachers on YouTube. There's a misconception buzzing around right now that we need to unhitch from the Old Testament. You heard that? Yeah, that's a mess. We actually don't need to do that. We need to rehitch to the Old Testament and take it seriously. You can't unhitch from it. That's like saying unhitch from your family tree, kind of. You can't do that. It's just it's a part of our heritage. It's the foundation on which our theology is built. It's Jesus' story. You can't unhitch from the Old Testament. So we need to spend some time in it to figure out how to better be connected to it, if that makes sense. It's our past. It's part of the grand story of redemptive history. You can't just dismiss it. We want to figure out how to stay connected to it in order to better understand Jesus and the New Testament. Joseph is going to help us to do that. And then finally, why are we doing Joseph? I just want to say, personally, I love, this is probably my favorite Old Testament character. If you can have favorites, I don't know. Not too long ago, a friend of mine he was getting ready for his wedding. He's not a believer. And I think he was looking for scripture passages to use in his wedding, and he asked me, what's your favorite Bible story? I thought, nobody's ever asked me that, I don't think. I said, if I had to pick one, I'd probably go with Joseph, which might seem strange, but over the next few weeks, I hope we can understand why I value Joseph so much. It says so much about Jesus, so much about the rest of the Bible. He's a very special character. I really enjoy studying him, preaching him. I love the literary structure, the drama, the typology, and all of this. It's just a lot of fun. I really enjoy this, and so I hope that can be true for you as well. It's so good. It's so loaded, and I think we can really enjoy this. So why are we studying Joseph? It meets a need in our CBC Bible diet. Okay. Why are we studying Joseph? It's going to resonate with really deep parts of all of our stories. And lastly, your elders are really excited about this. The best part of all of this is that it points us clearly to Christ. That's why we're getting into this over the next few weeks. And today is our first introduction to that Joseph story with the situation that he was born into. Today's passage, more specifically, records how Joseph's family, his moms, yes, plural moms, his moms and his brothers all came to be. And it highlights the family dynamics, the patterns, the systematic behaviors that his family kind of had, and it shows some dysfunction and expresses the real and raw emotion of family building. You saw that in the little fight between Rachel and Jacob. It explains a lot of why Joseph is the way he is, and it shows God working in a very messy situation. More specifically, this very important family that we're going to look at today was built through 4 women who kind of hated each other and saw pregnancy, childbearing, as a way to compete for love and significance. God did not abandon that family. He didn't look at that mess and say, oh, that's just too much for me to deal with. No, he rolled up his sleeves, got into it, and showed love and tenderness and compassion. Ultimately, he kept his promise to make a nation out of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's family, to bless his people, even though we are a mess. That's the main point for today. That God keeps his promise and blesses his people, even though we are a mess. This text makes that point really well, shows it really clearly. That's actually the story of the whole Bible, and it really pops out in this text that we're going to study today. That idea shows up in the first section of this passage where there's an unloved wife. That's a messy situation. That's a horrible title. An unloved wife. What a tragic position to be in. And it makes you wonder, if you're that wife, how do you even put dinner on the table? How do you come home from work and not just want to sit in your car for 3 hours? Like, I don't even want to go inside and see these people because nobody in there likes me. Nobody in there wants me or appreciates me. That's Leah. Really, really tough spot. Absolutely brutal. And God is going to see this. God sees this painful wound in Leah's heart, this deep need to be loved, and he's going to do something with it. He's going to do something about it in this messed up situation. God's going to keep his promise and bless his people despite this loveless marriage. Let's look at what God does with Leah in her tough situation, this loveless marriage. Starting in verse 29 I'm sorry, chapter 29, verse 31. I'm going to read these last 5 verses of 29. Look back down at 29:31. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simeon. And she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." So he was named Levi. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "This time I will praise the Lord." So she named him Judah, and she stopped having children. Why is this marriage so bad? Why is Leah so unloved? Real quick background, if you're not familiar with this story. Just a few verses earlier, in chapter 29, Jacob, the husband in this family, he had gone out on a journey before he was married to meet a man named Laban, to marry one of his daughters, specifically Rachel. He went out to go look for his wife, future wife. When he came to Laban, he agreed to work for 7 years to kind of earn the right to marry Rachel. And at the end of those 7 years, after the wedding, at which they might have been a little drunk, he wakes up in the morning and, oh shoot, Leah is next to him, the older sister that he wasn't really attracted to, and he's really mad and disappointed. So he gets on Laban and says, "What are you doing? What have you done to me? Why'd you trick me like this?" And Laban gives some lame answer like, "Oh, it's our custom or something." Not, he's just making stuff up. And he gets Jacob to work another 7 years to earn Rachel again, really. So you can see in that little picture, the resentment started on the wedding night, didn't it? Or the day after. Already, at the very beginning, the first day of their marriage, Jacob resents Leah. And Jacob loves Rachel more than Leah. It's a messed up situation that leaves Leah dreaming for love, dreaming to be loved. And that's what's underneath this envious competition between these sisters that you see echoing throughout this passage and down the family line. And it makes the readers of Genesis 29 ask the question, what is God going to do with this? This is a horrible, horrible marriage. What's God going to do here? Did he endorse it? Did he say, yeah, that's okay, we'll just leave this alone? Does he completely fix it? Change it? Stop it? When verse 1, it says that God saw. That is the first action God took. He looks at this. He sees it. He acknowledges it. He says, yes, I see that this is a painful situation. He sees Leah's lack of love, and he opens her womb, giving her this tremendous gift of a baby. God enters into this very messy situation, this dysfunction. He didn't throw his hands up and quit on his promise to make a nation out of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right? That's all through the beginning of Genesis. But he rolls his sleeves up and gets his hands in there and starts to do good and gracious things for this very hurt and unloved wife. He saw, he opened, and Leah gave birth to a son. And one of the really cool features of this particular passage about that son and the other sons and kids that will come through here, I'm not going to go through all the names, but one of the cool elements of this passage is those names tell a story about what the wives were going through, their relationship with God or their relationship with each other. Those kids' names are kind of narrating this story of how Jacob's family was built. And you see that first with Reuben, whose name in Hebrew sounds like see and son. See a son, or look, a son. This name Reuben is making that point, saying, look, God gave me a son, or God saw and gave me the son. It's telling the story of what God did. Because God saw her nightmare of a marriage, her misery, and her starving for love, and gave a son in that situation. It's true of the second son, too, in verse 33. Simeon, or in Hebrew, we pronounce more like Shimon, which sounds a lot like it really comes from the Hebrew word to hear. You've heard of the Shema, Shimon, they're relative words. God has seen through Reuben and heard through Simeon the misery of this unloved wife. He's doing something about this situation. He's touching it. He's mending a wound. He's showing compassion and tenderness in her hurt. He's caring. He's keeping his promise. He's blessing this unloved mom in the middle of a very messy marriage, dysfunctional situation. Leah would go on to have 2 more kids in this section, 2 more sons, Levi and Judah, which tell the story of how she wanted to be attached, Levi, that's what his name means, and feel connected and loved and needed, feel married, feel like a real wife. Thinking, maybe this son is my ticket to winning the affection of my husband. She would chew on that, think about that over the next few years, next few months. Her dream of being loved and connected and attached would never really come true. But then another son would come along bearing the name, God be praised, Judah. So when you take all these kids' names, you kind of put them together. Here's the story that you get of Leah in the beginning of this passage. The Lord saw, the Lord heard. What I really want is to be loved and connected with my husband, but I know I'm not going to get that. That's not going to happen. But I'm going to praise the Lord anyway. That's the story of Leah in these first few verses. And I think what that's saying to us is that, believe it or not, you or I could go through life feeling completely unloved, unattached, never get that intimacy that we want so badly. No one likes us, but you would still be loved deeply by Jesus, right? Your dreams might never come true. Your dreams for very real, normal, appropriate, okay, understandable needs to be met. Your need for love and intimacy, we need that. It's normal to be hungry for that. That need might never be met in a friend, a girlfriend, in an aloof husband like Jacob, or even in your children, but you can always find that love and intimacy in Jesus Christ. I think that's what this is pointing us towards. You can always find that in the Lord who sees you like God saw Leah, and the God who hears you like God heard Leah in her pain. I think we can learn that from Leah's story and remember that. We may continue through life feeling unloved, unappreciated, disconnected, but we can get that through God, through the God who hears us and sees us. We can learn that from Leah's story, and this part of the story about God keeping his promise, blessing his people, despite a loveless marriage. In the next section, we'll see that Leah wasn't the only one who was hurt and frustrated by this situation, by this dysfunctional family system. There's another wife, remember Rachel, who's about to express this desperation and intensity that this unrealized dream produced in her, a dream that never came true for her. So we're going to look at Rachel's outburst in the next few verses. We're going to look at Jacob's not so great reaction, and then what God did to keep his promise and to bless his people, even through a jealous, childless wife. Look back down at 30, verse 1. Chapter 30, verse 1. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I will die." Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children?" And she said, "Here is Bilhah, my maidservant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and that through her I too can build a family." So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her, and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, "God has vindicated me, and he has listened to my plea and given me a son." Because of this, she named him Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won." So she named him Naphtali. There are a number of issues and dynamics in this kind of strange and uncomfortable passage that we have to work through. I think we have time to get through all 3 of these. Polygamy, we've got to talk about that for a minute. Surrogacy, specifically maidservant surrogacy, not modern. Okay, I'm not talking about that. But enslaved surrogacy. And then Rachel and Jacob's fight. They had a little fight in the Bible. We'll see what we can learn from that. So we'll go through each of those 3 things and talk about them. First question, is polygamy okay? Is polygamy okay? There's actually some debate about this. Is polygamy okay in the Bible? So far in this passage, there are 3 wives. It's polygamy. And there's going to be a fourth that comes in the next section. You saw that Bilhah wasn't just given to Jacob as a slave or servant. It was to become an additional wife. So that's polygamy. Is that okay? It doesn't seem to be explicitly condemned in this text here. And if you're really familiar, you got to be a nerd to know this, but if you're really familiar with the Mosaic Covenant, Old Testament law, you know that it's not completely forbidden there either. So is that a loophole? Is polygamy okay? Our non-Christian friends might look at this kind of passage and object to all of Christianity, saying this is ridiculous because the Bible teaches polygamy. Does it though? Does the Bible really say it's okay? Here's how you respond. Confidently, but also humbly, okay? And say, no, the Bible does not teach that polygamy is okay. 3 points on this. 1, this particular text serves as a case study on polygamy. Is it going well for this family? Is polygamy working out? No, it's a disaster. This is a huge mess. This is enormously dysfunctional. Nothing about this text says polygamy is a good idea, or it's holding up as an example, like, yeah, let's do this. No, this is a portrait of dysfunction. It's a terrible family system. It's unhealthy, it's emotionally unsafe, it's unstable, it's competitive. It's depicting polygamy as a system that does not work. You don't always need a clear instruction saying, do not do polygamy. You can have a story that says, polygamy is horrible, don't do it, That's kind of how it's being communicated here. That's the first point, first way we can know polygamy is not okay in the Bible, okay? Second, polygamy was never a part of God's original design for marriage. Genesis 30 is not that far away from Genesis 2, 1 and 2, where he made man and woman, put them together, and said, this is a good thing. This is how I want marriage to work, okay? So the original readers would have known that. They would have had this one man, one woman monogamous standard or template for marriage well in mind. They got it when they're reading this. So should we. And so what I'm trying to say is that God designed marriage 28 chapters earlier, and here we have a picture of people messing it up, doing damage to it. So this passage is descriptive, telling us about what happened. It's not prescriptive, telling us what to do. Okay? Just the fact that it's recorded in the Bible doesn't say you should go do this. It's just saying, look at this, it's a mess. It doesn't align with what God wrote, told, and instructed 28 chapters earlier, so don't do it. Okay? That's the second reason. Third, lastly, culturally, in the ancient Near East, the cultures around this early version of Israel, was it okay to do this? It was kind of okay to practice polygamy back then. It was kind of uncommon. It was hard to make it work, but it was kind of okay. Even though it was okay in culture for the people around these people, we know that God commands his particular people to be different, right? Just like us today, be holy. We already showed how that comes through in story form in Genesis, but then specifically in Exodus 21, where God does start giving instructions about it. He doesn't outright condemn it, but he does put restrictions on it so that it doesn't make it an oppressive, abusive situation for multiple wives. Then in Leviticus 18, it definitely explicitly forbids marrying two sisters, which makes it really clear that Jacob shouldn't have done this. Okay? And then later in the Bible, all the way forward to the Song of Solomon, monogamy is the thing that is celebrated and uplifted. It's later what's instructed in Paul's letters to the churches. It's the nature of Jesus' relationship to his people. Jesus is our groom and the church is his bride. So we can be really confident for all those reasons that polygamy is not God's plan for marriage, even if it was acceptable in these early Bible times. The Bible is not depicting it as a good thing. Okay, so that's polygamy. How about surrogacy? This enslaved surrogacy. Was it okay to make your female servant sleep with your husband to get pregnant? To carry and deliver a baby and then to take credit for that child? That doesn't sound okay, does it? There was a provision for this custom in contemporary non-Israelite literature. It was allowed outside of Israel, but that doesn't make it okay for God's people, similar to polygamy. If you remember back to the story of Abraham and Sarah in Genesis 16, and how that childless wife, Sarah, used her servant, Hagar, as a surrogate, you know that damaged relationships really, really deeply. It hurt a family, which would resonate into people groups and religions and create conflict that still exists today. Huge, huge. Not a good thing. So it was socially permitted, but the narrative of Genesis shows that it's not a good thing. It's not a favorable idea. That it's kind of a cheat in the system, kind of a way to cheat. Rachel does that as kind of a workaround. And in our final verses of this passage, which we'll get to later, we're going to see that it doesn't really work. It doesn't really get her the things she wants. So I want to be clear, this passage, the Bible, is not advocating for this kind of enslaved surrogacy. Okay. Third, how about this fight between Jacob and Rachel at the beginning of this section? Rachel sees this situation. She looks at her life, and she becomes envious, jealous, and she demands to her husband, picture her grabbing him by the collars, get me pregnant, or I will die. Give me children, or I don't even want to go on with life. Intense moment for this couple. Give me pregnant, give me kids, or I'm going to die. I don't know what my purpose is if you don't give me children. If you don't give me children and the honor and the status and the significance that it brings, the validation of our marriage, that getting that label off of my back that something's wrong with me. Getting those looks off of me that I get when I go into town. And people kind of like, ooh, what's wrong with her? You need to end that for me, Jacob. If you can't do that for me, I don't even know if I want to live. It's an intense moment. Rachel says, I need to be vindicated, and I need to come out on top in this wrestling match with my sister. That's what Dan and Naphtali mean, by the way, in modern language. This is like Rachel saying, you did this to me. You did this to me. You have left me barren. That is a lot of pressure to put on a husband. A really hurtful thing to say, isn't it? Hard thing for a man to hear. So Jacob, in anger, which can certainly be masking other emotions, right? Covering up some fears and insecurities and disappointments and maybe repulsion that's going on inside of him. He reacts in anger and roars back at her. He says, lady, I'm not God. Don't put that on me. I can't do anything about this. That's not fair. It's not right. Get off of me. I think this fight in Scripture is a really helpful moment for us to pause and consider. Ask yourself this question. Am I looking to my spouse to do what only God can do? Am I expecting my spouse to be God for me? It's kind of what Rachel was doing with Jacob. Am I taking all my anxieties, my anger, and dumping them on my husband or wife? Ask that question. Am I pouring my disappointments and my frustrations onto my spouse? I've done things like this with my wife unknowingly. I can look at it now and confess it, but I think I've accidentally used her and her affirmation to fix my self-esteem issues, my identity problems. That's really something I have to go to God to. I got to keep an eye out for that. You have to look for that kind of stuff in your marriage too. Don't expect your spouse to be God. Don't treat your wife, your husband, in ways that you need to be treating God. Because if we're drawing our significance like life water from our spouse, then what happens when that well runs dry? If we're wearing our spouse like a parachute backpack, what happens when that pull string doesn't work anymore? Your spouse can't handle that. What happens when your spouse loses that prestigious job that gave you a lot of pride you like to tell people about? What happens when an investment goes south in your marriage? When their body starts to break down? You'll be incredibly disappointed and they'll be deeply hurt because that is a crushing pressure. We can't expect our spouse to be what only God can be. Friends, your status, your worth, your identity is not in your husband or your wife. It's not in the prospect of a husband or wife. The future idea, the dream of it. It's not in your ability to have a family. It's not in your measuring up to social standards like Rachel. Your worth is in Christ alone, who measured up to God's standards for us, who declared your worth when he bought you at the price of his own life. and who gives you an eternal family built by God himself. This is what Jesus does for you. Secondly, this fight between Rachel and Jacob also lets us pause and wonder and ask this question: am I dreaming for the right things? Am I dreaming the right things? What thing is ultimate to me? Another way to say that: what would make me say, if I don't get that thing, I think I want to die. I don't even want to go on in life. If I can't get that, I have no purpose. If this dream doesn't come true, I don't know how I'm going to go on. You know? I'm not here to crush your dreams or judge your desires, okay? I'm not going to start listing a bunch of things that you might want. I'm just inviting you through this passage, I think this is what the passage is doing, to ask us, am I dreaming for the proper things? Have I made something that I want really bad my ultimate thing? Am I really going to die if I don't get that thing? Is this thing that I want, this different reality, this future, this person, is that really what's going to make me come alive? Let's ask, is there anything that I've set my sights on that I believe will be more life-giving than the life-giver himself? Let's ask, is this going to give me more comfort than God, the comforter himself? Is this going to make me more significant and secure than the maker himself? Am I making this thing an ultimate thing, putting it in God's place? This is asking us to question that. So let's check our dreams. Let's not let them take the place of God, okay? Let's not expect our spouse to be what only God can be. Rachel's and Jacob's fight here in Genesis 30 prompt us to do that. This fight also reminds us that God can work in a messy, dysfunctional situation. He can enter into our jealousy and our wrestling, our misplaced hopes, our angry reactions, our marriage fights, our cheating the system to force our dreams into reality, to get those things that we really want, and still keep his promise to bless his people. This continues to be true for Leah, who realizes in this next section that she's no longer able to do the only thing that she thought would give her significance, the only thing that she thought made her valuable or worth anything in her marriage. She lost it. That's a huge blow. At the start of verse 9, we're going to see she's still unloved, but now she's also unable to have kids. She's left feeling really insignificant and helpless. But God notices that too, and he does something about it, just like he does in every other section of this passage. And he's going to keep his promise and bless his people even when we grasp for significance. Let's look at that starting in verse 39. When Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her maidservant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "What good fortune!" So she named him Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, "How happy am I! The women will call me happy." So she named him Asher. It's a strange story here. Then, during the wheat harvest, Reuben, oldest son, went out into the field and found some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother Leah. Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she, Leah, says to Rachel, "Wasn't it enough that you took my husband away? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" "Very well," Rachel said, "he can sleep with you tonight, in return for your son's mandrakes." So when Jacob came in from the fields that evening, Leah went out to meet him. "You must sleep with me," she said. "I have hired you, bought you with my son's mandrakes." So he slept with her that night. God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a fifth son. Then Leah said, "God has rewarded me for giving my maidservant to my husband." So she named him Issachar. Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, "God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor because I have borne him 6 sons." So she named him Zebulun. Sometime later she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Leah is left in a really difficult spot here, right? Possibly worse than before. At the beginning of this section, not only is she still not loved by her husband and hated by her sister, but her sister kind of passed her up. Her sister just declared victory over her, said, "I've been wrestling with my sister and I've won. I'm better. I'm finally better than Leah. Again, I'm on top. This is exactly what poor Leah does not need right now. Just a punch, just crushing. So Leah sees this and feels this, obviously. She resorts to that same tactic that Rachel used earlier that we talked about not being a good idea, by giving her maidservant to Jacob so that Leah can take credit for more children and hopefully use those kids to feel better about herself. I don't recommend using your kids that way, by the way. Side note. Seriously. 2 more sons come into the family this way through Silpah, the maidservant. Leah seems to express optimism about that, about Gad and Asher. But there's still a problem. There's still a tension. She's still not allowed in the bedroom. Is that crazy? How brutal is that? My goodness. Like that is among the deepest wounds that you can inflict on a spouse. How do you fix that? I wonder if Leah thought, maybe aphrodisiacs. Maybe there's some kind of fertility booster that I can go find that's going to make myself more appealing, more fertile. You know? That seems to be the solution. And so Reuben, her son, finds these things called mandrakes for his mom, Leah, brings them home. Mediterranean mandrakes, none of us probably have these in our garden. This is strange. They're these rooty plants, kind of in the potato family, that have this really pungent smell. They have dark green leaves, little violet flowers, and edible yellow berries like the size of a cherry tomato. I don't know. That's just what they are. And these were used as aphrodisiacs, or something that would support and boost conception and fertility in the ancient world for a long time, not just in this era, but well into up around the 1st century maybe. And this seemed to be Leah's only hope of love and dignity and significance at this point. It's like all she's got. It's this potato thing. And her sister Rachel, who's also trying to get pregnant, by the way, Rachel still hasn't actually had any kids of her own, has the nerve to ask for some of those plants. It's brutal. It's like, let me borrow that little black dress that you never wear anymore because you don't fit in it. It's like, whoa. You know, it's just so deep and personal. Most of us, we'd start pulling hair and throwing punches at that point. Leah kind of keeps it together and is like, are you serious? Have you not hurt me enough? You know? So Rachel, who has the keys to the bedroom, says, okay, I'll make you a little trade. It's like a bad episode of The Bachelor or something. Can I borrow him for a minute? You know? So I don't watch The Bachelor, okay? Don't judge me. I just know that's a thing. So Rachel cuts a deal. She's like, I will trade you conjugal rights. I'll trade you a few nights, at least one night, I think a few, in the bedroom for your aphrodisiac plants. Leah says, fine, I'll go with that. It's another stab in the heart. It's another deep wound. It's another punch in the gut. But it's all Leah's got at this point. She wants this so badly for her dream to come true, to be loved and feel significant. It's all she's got. So she releases this thing, this aphrodisiac, this fertility booster. She says, it's worth a shot, you know. She takes the deal, hands out over that last tool in her bag, just empties it out, earns a night with Jacob, and has to tell Jacob, I paid to sleep with you. You're going to sleep with me tonight. And it's not wrong for her to say that. Jacob is the one neglecting his marital duties here. So it's fine that she says that. You have to do this, she says to Jacob. And I think what's going on there is that this is a little bit of a demonstration of faith for Leah. Giving up the last tool in her bag, her last resort, her last shot, and saying, okay, that's all I got. You know, I think this is a little bit of faith here. Because letting go of this leads to 3 more children and an acknowledgement that God is honoring this act. Okay? I think what this does in us, this really weird potato plant story, I think what this is doing for us is asking us, kind of, what's your mandrake? Track with me for a second. What are you and I holding on to? Gripping with white knuckles that we think is going to make our dream come true. I think this is going to get me what I need. I don't want to let it go. This is my last resort. This is all I got. You know, what do you think is your key to significance? Little story. When I was a worship leader in California, previous job, I thought that my key to significance was to write music, to put out a worship album, to kind of make a name for myself in the Bay Area, San Francisco area. I thought that that would help my church to thrive. I thought that's what success and significance looked like in my field. So I tried really hard to write music. I'm not a music writer. It was so frustrating. I tried to compete. I didn't know I was doing it, but I think I tried to compete with other worship leaders in the area by keeping up with the tech and the song choices and the cool instruments and the artistry and making our stage look all pretty. I was trying to be a good worship leader, trying to go after significance and success. But I realized that that's not really what God had called me to do. I thought that was my key to success and significance. I needed to let that go. And so I eventually gave up music writing. I felt God just say, Dan, just stop. Just give it up. Be done. It's not you. Okay? And then a short time later, our church had a budget shortage. And our staff got real anxious about that. We heard pay cuts and layoffs, and this was right around the housing crisis time. And what that did, it was actually a really good thing. What that did was make me find some new perspective and figure out what was really important, what God really had called me there to do. And so I had to shift my focus onto something that would really last, that would actually be significant and successful if I were let go. And what that was, I need to let go of the songwriting and being awesome as a worship leader, just being cool and successful, and focus on developing other church leaders who could take my place if I got cut. I think that's what God called me there to do. And God used that moment, really stressful situation where a lot of people were worried about losing their jobs. God used that to show me that I was actually really passionate about developing leaders. I didn't know it until I got put in this situation. God forced that out of my hand, like Leah's mandrakes, or that key to success and significance. God made me let go of a good thing to get a better thing. God made me release my trying and my working hard in order to let God do the work through me. You might have something like that too. What is that dream, that key to significance, that mandrake that you are gripping right now? It's just not quite coming to fruition. It's not quite making your calling work, Can you ask God, Lord, is this really what you want for me? Do I need to let this go? Trust you a little bit more? What do I need to let go of to receive what you want to give me? How do I need to stop trying to make myself significant so that God can do a much better job for us? I think that's the question this passage is asking us. So God wanted to keep his promise and bless Leah in that scene, through that situation. Not despite the messiness of the story, but partly because of it. I think we're seeing here God's tenderness and his compassion, giving dignity, honor, significance to this poor, fourth-string kind of wife who was starving for love and respect. He met that need. But God's attention was not only on Leah. In these final two verses, God remembers Rachel as well, who still hasn't had any kids of her own. He turns his ear to her. He opens her womb and he gives her a son finally. Look at that real quickly as we prepare to wrap up in just a couple minutes. In verse 22 to 24, we're going to see this. God keeps his promise and blesses his people by removing our shame. Still true today. Look at verse 22. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. She became pregnant, gave birth to a son, and said, God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph and said, may the Lord add to me another son. Look at that. God remembered, God listened, and God opened. Again, he's interacting with this dysfunctional, messy family. It's full of jealousy and competition. He's not afraid to get in there to this family with hate and hurt, 4 messed up marriages. He's keeping his promise to bless his people. And for Rachel, what that divine intervention did was take away her disgrace or her reproach. And that's the thing that tells us that her earlier attempt to use her servant as a surrogate, that never really worked, did it? It didn't make her dream come true. It didn't deal with her shame and her disgrace. if she still has it here, she was not able to fix it on her own. Friends, the gospel works exactly this way for us today. We have to realize that our own efforts to earn significance and status and love and intimacy and ultimately salvation from the mess that we've made, they always fall short. They never really work. They never really last, do they? We need to see that only God himself can give us the forgiveness and the salvation that we so badly need but can't get on our own. We have to recognize and accept that he sent Jesus Christ to enter into our mess, to get into our dysfunction, and through his life, his death, his resurrection, graciously clean us up, remove our shame, restore our dignity, and give us real, eternal life in a truly loving relationship with him. And that is a promise fulfilled. That's the real blessing, and that's the dream come true, isn't it? Let's pray.